In 1943, over Nazi-occupied Europe, thousands of Allied bombers filled the skies. But in the pages of history, one single aircraft stands above. Her name synonymous with the men who flew the fortress, with American perseverance, and with victory. The Memphis Belle. But why? What made her special? And what parts of her story are true and what is not? Today, we dive into the history of the Memphis Belle, the real story without Hollywood, without dramatization, and see what is the real story and who were the men who flew history's most famous B-17. It is October of 1942, and here in England, a brand new aircraft, fresh off the production line, comes into land at RAF Bassingbourn. This heavy bomber would be an American-made B-17, also known as the Flying Fortress. At this time, the very first forces of the United States Army Air Corps had begun to arrive here in England to bring the war to Hitler's doorstep. These bombers would be the first American aircraft assigned to that job, beginning very soon a campaign that would rain down terror from above. And here, this particular aircraft, B-17 41-24485, would be destined to become the most iconic bomber in the war, and perhaps in all of history. But for now, she was just another bomber. No name, no art, and no story. However, all of that was about to change. Upon arriving, this fortress was assigned to the 324th Squadron of the 91st Bomb Group, along with her crew. This initial group of young men would be pilot Robert Morgan, co-pilot James Verinis, navigator Chuck Layton, bombardier Vincent Evans, top turret engineer Levi Dillon, radio operator Bob Hansen, ball turret gunner Cecil Scott, right waist gunner E. Scott Miller, left waist gunner Clarence Winchell, tail gunner John Quinlan, and mascot Stuka the Scottish Terrier. After joining the 91st, Captain Morgan's crew were ready for combat, and like most other crews, wanted to name their fortress before they flew her into battle. And at this point, Captain Morgan already had an idea in mind to name the bomber after his sweetheart back home in Memphis, Tennessee, a young girl by the name of Margaret Polk. But this name isn't what you might think. The original name that he had in mind was Little One, his pet name for Polk. But that changed one night when he and his co-pilot, Jim Verinis, went to the theater and watched a film by the name of Lady for a Night, starring John Wayne. In this film, Wayne's character owns a riverboat, and that boat's name is one that might be a little more familiar.
I told you Memphis society wouldn't put up with making a queen out of your Memphis Belle.
Save that fast shuffle for the numbskulls that come to the Memphis Belle.
After watching this film, Captain Robert Morgan had his new name in mind, the Memphis Belle. He proposed it to his crew soon after, and they all agreed. Thus, the legend of the Memphis Belle was born. But this legend still needed a face, an image to go along with her name. Fortunately, during this time, many publications and artists back in the States were happy to do their part to help the men at war. So when Captain Morgan contacted George Petty, a pinup artist at Esquire magazine, asking for a beautiful woman for their aircraft, he gladly obliged, sending them a pinup from the 1941 issue. Here we have located a copy of this exact issue and found this, a beautiful pinup with a caption that reads simply, "I'm the one with the part in the back." From here, the rest is history. Shortly after receiving this pinup, the group had 91st Bomb Group artist Tony Starcer add the art to the newly named Memphis Belle. on each side of the nose, with one in red and one in blue. The Belle was now ready, as beautiful as could be, and her first date was scheduled before she knew it. This would take place on November 7th of 1942. This would be the first official mission for the 91st Bomb Group, a raid to the submarine pens at Brest, France. This would fortunately be an easy mission for the 91st Bomb Group and the other participating units. The bombing was accurate and damage was done to the target, all for no losses to the group. If this continued, the crews would be able to get to their magic number of 25 missions in no time, the number needed to complete a tour and punch your ticket back home. 1 down, 24 to go. But they were in for a rude awakening, and this was not to be the case. 2 days later, the Belle and the 91st Bomb Group were assigned to another mission, this time to bomb the docks of St. Nazaire, a place that would soon gain the notorious title of Flak City. And also noteworthy is the fact that for this mission, the 91st Bomb Group attacked from an altitude of only 10,000 feet. Unfortunately, the leaders of the 8th Air Force had not yet realized how poor of a strategy this would be, and the 91st Bomb Group would pay their first price of the war when the closest aircraft to Captain Morgan and the Memphis Belle took a direct hit. This would be B-17 Delta Rebel No. 2, injuring 2 crew members on board. Delta Rebel No. 2, however, would fortunately make it back to base with all of her crew alive. But not everyone was so lucky. In one of the other 91st Bomb Group squadrons flying nearby, a B-17 took heavy damage from flak, where Bombardier 2nd Lieutenant Louis Briglia was injured badly. Upon arriving at the airbase, ambulances rushed to the bomber and took him to the hospital. But their efforts would be in vain, and he perished during the night, becoming the first combat casualty of the 91st Bomb Group. This would be the first of many. But the Belle had made it. 2 missions down, 23 to go. And this is where we see the truth of daylight bombing in 1942, the brutality and the cost. In the 1990 movie, The Memphis Belle, one of the things that we first hear is that the Belle has never taken combat damage.
So that's the crew of the Memphis Belle, huh?
Those are the enlisted men. You're meeting the officers this afternoon.
First they volunteer for all this, and then they fly 24 missions without a scratch.
But this could not be farther from the truth. On her second mission, in fact, the Belle was listed as having taken slight damage, and from here on out would actually take damage of varying degrees on nearly every single mission. On mission number 3, for example, they would take their first injury to crew. This would be on yet another mission to Flak City on November 17th. But this time, their primary threat would be German fighters, which came up in force. The Belle's gunners did well here, but one of her crew, top turret engineer Levi Dillon, was shot in the leg by a Focke-Wulf 190. However, there were no injuries on the post-mission report for Morgan's crew. This would be because Dillon did not report the injury, but simply had it bandaged by a friend, as he didn't want to miss any action. Nonetheless, this would be her first mission that showed that her crew was in fact vulnerable. 3 missions down, 22 to go. Just 2 weeks later, the crew of the Memphis Belle likely had their greatest stroke of luck in the entire war, when they had to abort their first mission. On this day, the 91st Bomb Group was sent for another attack to St. Nazaire, this time to bomb the entrance of the submarine pens. But as the Belle took off, 2 of her engines failed shortly after getting airborne. Because of this, Captain Morgan was forced to abort the mission, returning to Basenborn. This left the other 3 planes in their squadron and the rest of the 91st Bomb Group to continue on with the mission. The crew of the Belle was no doubt upset that they had to sit this one out, but in reality it may have been a saving grace. The November 23rd mission to Saint Nazaire would be a disaster for the 91st Bomb Group. A summary of the daily report for this mission reads as follows.
First disastrous mission. First aircraft lost in group. We lost our squadron commander, squadron navigator, and a crew pilot. 322nd lost their squadron commanding officer. Lieutenant Corman got his plane back, but had to make a crash landing on 2 engines with serious damage. It killed half the crew. No bombs were dropped on target due to bad weather. Final losses from our squadron. 1 aircraft missing. 1 aircraft destroyed. 11 men missing. 5 killed. And 8 wounded.
This would be a long day for the boys from the Belle, finding out what had happened to their fellow squadron mates. But also, it began to create more challenges, the loss of numbers. In 1942, the numerical power of the 8th Air Force was extremely low, for many of these missions actually saw the American Air Corps putting up less than 40 aircraft at a time, almost always with no fighter escort. So when a squadron like this lost multiple aircraft, it meant that that unit for their next mission or two would likely have smaller numbers until replacement aircraft or crews were made ready. This could expose them even further to German fighters, who preferred attacking smaller formations. But fortunately, the brass would see this and gave them a break, with the next mission for the 91st not coming until a few weeks later, on December 6th. And another blessing, this would be a milk run, with no losses and only light resistance. The days went on and the missions continued. December 20th, another one in the books, to Ramillies, France, with moderate fighter resistance. December 30th, Captain Morgan gets a day off, and co-pilot Varennes takes control of the Belle for another mission to Lorient, France. Here, the commanding officer of the 401st Squadron died from wounds received. Another aircraft was missing, but yet again, the Belle made it home with only slight damage. On January 3rd, the 91st was sent yet again to their most frequented target, Saint Nazaire. But on this day, they would be accompanied by none other than Major Claude Putnam, the commanding officer of the entire bomb group. He opted to lead by example and frequently flew with his men. And the mission that he chose to join them on today would be a long one, with the combat report listing the flak as the heaviest and most accurate to date. In addition, the Luftwaffe also answered the raid, putting up a heavy force of Focke-Wulf 190s. But on this strike, the Belle would get a tally of her own, when her gunners claimed their first kill of the war, downing a German fighter over the target. Upon landing back at the airfield, the Belle had her first swastika painted on her, now a credited killer of German aircraft. 7 missions down, 18 to go. On January 13th, another raid to the marshalling yards of France. Here, the Memphis Belle would lead the entire 91st Bomb Group, and no losses were taken. On January 23rd, the Memphis Belle once again was selected as lead ship, due to her pilot, Captain Morgan's reputation as a solid flyer. This time, however, she took more serious damage, along with nearly every other ship in the squadron. This would create a bottleneck for the grounds crews, who were forced to work overtime to try and get the aircraft operational once again. And it was here, around this time in late January, that a crucial event in the history of the Memphis Belle took place. A man by the name of William Wyler approached Captain Morgan, asking if he could film him and his crew. Wyler was a renowned Hollywood filmmaker and had recently been assigned to the 8th Air Force in Europe to document and shoot a film on the B-17s in England. He was at this time already following another crew as the feature for this film. This would be a bomber by the name of Invasion II, flown by Oscar O'Neill. But he was aware of the risks of war and wanted to make sure that he had a backup crew to focus on for his production, giving him a better chance of not betting all of his focus on the survival of one single crew. Wyler had apparently taken a liking to the Belle because he thought her name had a certain mystique to it, and he knew that Morgan was a good pilot and would give him a good chance of coming back home. So Captain Morgan agreed that Wyler could film him and the men of the Belle, and even accompany them on missions, as long as he agreed not to interfere with the operations of the aircraft. Wyler agreed and began shooting what would become some of the most important footage of the Second World War. But interestingly, the first mission that he flew with Morgan and his crew to film would not even be on the Memphis Belle, but instead on a different fortress by the name of Jersey Bounce, on February 4th of 1943. This was because of the damage that the Belle had received on the last mission, and she was not fully repaired yet. So Morgan and his crew were forced to take the next available plane, the Jersey Bounce. And this would be no normal mission either, but the group's first official mission to bomb a target in Germany, Emden. Here, leading the group once again, Morgan and his crew made it out with only slight damage. Their squadron lost no aircraft, but the rest of the group was not so lucky, losing 2 of their B-17s. 10 missions down, 15 to go. February 14th, the marshalling yards in Ham were targeted, but bad weather prevented the bombs from being dropped. No enemy aircraft spotted, an easy mission in the books. On February 16th, back to St. Nazaire, and back to the newly repaired Memphis Belle. Here, bombs were dropped on the target with high accuracy, and substantial damage was confirmed. But damage also taken to the Belle. One important note here that we can also see is that in the logbooks of the Belle, air-to-air bombing attempts were noted from the Focke-Wulfs of the Luftwaffe. This would be a rare tactic that did not last long, but the fascinating truth is that one of the first targets of this strategy of air-to-air bombing would be indeed the Memphis Belle. On February 27th, another raid to Brest, lucky mission 13 in the books. And once again, luck seemed to stay with the Memphis Belle. On the next strike, on March 4th of 1943, Captain Morgan was once again forced to abort with yet another engine failure. So they turned back to base, sitting out this mission, while the rest of the 91st carried on, straight into a massacre. The following is a summary of the 324th Squadron report after this mission.
Attack on Ham, Germany. Heavy attacks by enemy aircraft. The 91st was left all alone after other groups had turned back. Lieutenant Henderson and crew were missing on his first mission as a first pilot. Lieutenant Brill ditched. 7 of his crew picked up in North Sea after 3 others were lost in the waves. Also missing 1 aircraft from the 323rd and 1 from the 322nd. Final squadron losses from the 5 aircraft launched from the 324th. 2 aircraft lost, 3 dead, 3 wounded, 10 missing. Note to squadron commanders: never go again alone with just 1 bomb group.
But again, by the hand of fate, the Memphis Belle was at home, far from the action. March 6th was another raid to Lorient, France. No damage taken. March 12th, marshalling yards. No damage taken. Bombing results here were listed as excellent, with good RAF Spitfire cover over the target. Through these missions, William Wyler and his crew continued to shoot the men of the 91st Bomb Group, getting footage, sounds, and photos of the men flying the bombers over Europe. All was going well, and the production was on track, for now. On March 13th, back-to-back missions for the first time. A near collision with another group forced the 91st to drop their bombs on the secondary target. But it still counted. 16 missions down, 9 to go. March 22nd would be a raid to Wilhelmshaven, Germany. This would be one of the first raids to another notorious dock target. Here, one aircraft from the squadron of the Belle was lost, an aircraft by the name of Liberty Belle, flown by Captain Haskell McClellan. And what is important to note here is not only the fact that a B-17 very close to the Memphis Belle was lost, but how exactly it was lost. This truth would not be made clear until many years later, when a German ace by the name of Heinz Nock published his memoir. In it, the entry for March 22nd of 1943 reads as follows.
March 22nd, 1943. 14:24 hours. Alert sounds. I have a 500-pound bomb slung at top speed under my plane. But in the meantime, we are ordered to take off. My weighted plane rumbles awkwardly down to the far end of the runway. With the bomb, I cannot take off downwind. I open the throttle, start rolling with gathering speed, and then the crate again begins to list to port. I managed to pull it off the ground, however, after a run of some 600 feet and just barely clear the roof of Hangar 2 by inches. I climb at full throttle up into the cloudless sky, heading out to sea. Overhead are the vapor trails left by our own aircraft and the Yanks. They are already engaged in combat. 22,000 feet. My plane reacts sluggishly under the infernally heavy load. It climbs wearily up to 30,000 feet, taking 25 minutes to do so. The Yanks have bombed Wilhelmshaven, as I can tell from the smoke and fires below. They are over Heligoland on the return flight now. I edge forward slowly until I am over the tip of the enemy formation, which consists entirely of fortresses. For several minutes, I am under fire from below, while I take a very rough sort of aim at my target, weaving and dipping each wing tip alternately in order to see the formation below. 2 or 3 holes appear in my left wing. I fuse the bomb, take final aim, and press the release button on my stick. My bomb goes hurtling down. I watch it fall and bang steeply as I break away. Then it explodes, exactly in the center of a row of fortresses. A wing breaks off one of them, and 2 others plunge away in alarm. 20 miles west of Heligoland, my 3rd heavy bomber crashes into the sea. There is no sign of fire. It is followed by the torn wing fluttering down like an autumn leaf.
This attack by German ace Heinz Nock would be the first successful air-to-air bomb attack by the Luftwaffe. This happened just a few planes away from none other than the Memphis Belle. Captain McClellan and the crew of Liberty Belle, who were on their very first mission, were indeed all lost, killed in action over the North Sea. And again, we can see how this might have clearly inspired a compelling scene in the fictional 1990 movie. Here, another rookie crew with a patriotic bomber name suffered a similarly horrific fate.
It's the rookies. You got the rookies. Memphis Belle to Mother and Country, come in. Memphis Belle to Mother and Country, come in!
Despite the horror, however, the Memphis Belle again made it back home with no damage. 17 missions down, 8 to go. March 28th would see the Belle up again, this time to strike locomotive repair shops in France. The bombing was successful and the target was seen in flames, but fighter attack was heavy. The Belle's gunners claimed another kill of a German fighter, but it was a hollow victory, as another aircraft from their squadron was lost, that of Lieutenant John Cohen, with their entire crew also killed in action. 18 down, 7 to go. On the 5th of April, aircraft engine works at Antwerp, Belgium were the target. Heavy fighter attack over France were noted, but no damage was taken. The Belle's gunners strike yet again, claiming one fighter destroyed and one other damaged. April 16th would be a quiet raid to Lorient, France. This would have normally not been a noteworthy mission for the 91st had it not been for an incident in the nearby 93rd Bomb Group. Here, William Wyler, the filmmaker currently shooting the Belle's crew, had a devastating loss to his production. His sound director for the project, and a veteran from the First World War, was a young man by the name of Harold Tannenbaum. On this mission, he was tasked to fly with one of the B-24s of the 93rd for their mission to France. This would allow him to get some good photos and film of the B-17s from a farther distance during the mission. However, on the flight back home, his B-24, an aircraft named Daisy May, exploded, and everyone on board was killed. This was a major loss for the production, but more importantly, to Wyler and the rest of the crew shooting the film. They had lost a good friend, and it reminded them just how dangerous this job truly was. The very next day, things would get no easier. In back-to-back missions, the 91st Bomb Group was assigned to strike an aircraft factory in Bremen, Germany. This would be the first time the 8th Air Force had ever targeted the crucial German city. And if this name sounds familiar, that might be because in the 1990 movie, the 25th mission of the Memphis Belle was to Bremen. And the reaction of their crews in this picture says it all.
I hope you all had a good time last night, but now it's back to business. The target for today is Bremen.
But this is not accurate. This 21st mission would be the only time that the Belle attacked Bremen. And while it was not their final mission, it certainly was one to remember. The following is a section taken from the 91st Bomb Group's post-mission summary on April 17th of 1943.
Attacks by enemy aircraft were more numerous and more vicious than anything previously experienced by this group. Every type of enemy aircraft was sent against us, and most of the attacks were pressed home as closely as possible, some less than 100 feet. Many of the attacks came between 10 and 2 o'clock, although attacks were made from every position. Many of the attacks were made on the nose and just below the range of the nose guns. Many other attacks were also made from high and at very rapid speeds. Attacks were made by formations of several enemy aircraft flying in line astern, and by elements of 3 aircraft. A total of not less than 150 aircraft were sent out against us this formation, and it is thought that some of the ME-110s fired at ranges of 1,000 yards with 40 and 50 millimeter cannons. One aircraft reported that enemy aircraft were shooting at our men as they were parachuting after bailing out. It appeared that the enemy was again trying to drive the lead elements of the leading group off the bomb run after they were committed to it, apparently in hope that the bombing would be rendered inaccurate. A significant number of aircraft from the group were lost. One B-17 with tail shot off was seen spinning towards the ground 20 miles southeast of Wilhelmshaven. 6 parachutes seen. Another circling and going down over Germany, under control, 5 parachutes seen. One fort was seen with 2 engines and the fuselage on fire, heading back towards enemy territory. No parachutes seen. Another 2 bombers were seen to make good crash landings near the coast. 5 shoots and 8 shoots seen from those 2 aircraft.
As they came over the city, German aircraft came up in force and defended well. The 401st Squadron simply happened to be the lowest flight, the easiest target for the Germans. In this position, their unit was slaughtered, losing 6 aircraft. The Belle and the 324th simply happened to be in a better position, and because of that, were not hit. This would be the largest loss to this point in the war for the 91st Bomb Group, with 60 men missing from the group and 6 aircraft lost. Across the entire 8th Air Force on this mission, 15 B-17s were downed, to a German loss of only 3 fighters. To make matters worse, it would also be a terrible day for William Wyler, as the primary subjects of his film, the crew of Invasion 2nd, were shot down over Bremen by a direct hit from flak and German fighters. Here we can see the actual aircraft positions in the formation, with Invasion 2nd leading the B flight on the opposite side of the Memphis Belle. It could have easily been the Belle flying there, but instead it was O'Neill and his crew, lost on their 23rd mission. In this tragic turn, the Memphis Belle and her crew had just become the new focus of his production. They could only hope that they wouldn't have the same fate as the first. 21 down, 4 more to go. After a couple of weeks off to recover from this difficult loss, Wyler notified the 91st Bomb Group commanders that the Memphis Belle would now be the focus of his film, and as such, needed to have a consistent crew. At this time in the 8th Air Force, it was common for crews to be traded around as needed, or for fill-ins to regularly join other crews for various reasons. In fact, the Belle by now had gotten a new top turret gunner, Harold Locke, and their co-pilot, James Verinis, had become a captain himself, taking over his own flying fortress. But for the purposes of this film, the crew of the Belle had to be brought back together to fly their final missions, and would not have replacements unless absolutely necessary. They would now have a seasoned crew who all knew each other well. To them, it was the ideal setup. It would allow them to have an experienced group of men, giving them the best chance to survive. And they would need it, because mission number 22 would be back to Flak City. This would be on May 1st of 1943, another raid to Saint Nazaire. This would be an extremely strange mission for the 91st Bomb Group. Over the target, all was fairly normal, until another potential collision course with another group forced them away from the target. Their bombs would be jettisoned over the water instead of dropped on the target. Only one bomber was lost from the 91st, but the real story came on the return flight. Here, according to the post-mission reports, 2 different bombers in the 324th reported seeing a strange B-17 with no markings flying by itself. This aircraft was likely a captured B-17 that the Germans were using to try and deceive or attack the American fortresses. But in addition, on the return flight, the crew reported a German radio beam directing them towards Brest, trying to lure them back towards France and confuse their navigation. And apparently this tactic worked, but not on the 91st Bomb Group. In another unit flying right by the Belle and the 91st on their way back to England, the navigators got confused, likely baited by the German radio signals. So they began to slowly peel away from the rest of the flight, while Captain Morgan and the Belle had to watch as the poor flight flew back towards Brest, right into the devil's teeth that they had just made it through. This unit would be led by none other than Claude Putnam, who had already flown one mission on board of the Belle and was now the current commanding officer for the 306th Bomb Group. This disaster would also be the very same flight that Maynard "Snuffy" Smith, the famous ball turret gunner, won his Medal of Honor after his bomber was hit heavily as they flew over Brest at low altitude. Here, multiple bombers were lost in this tragic mistake, but yet again, the Belle survived. 22 down, 3 to go. The next mission, on May 4th, was a much-needed milk run over Belgium. Factories were hit and air-to-air bombing was once again attempted by 190s, but to no avail. The group listed no losses to personnel or aircraft. Mission number 24 was now upon the crew of the Belle. As they entered the briefing room on May 15th, they saw the target, the docks of Wilhelmshaven, Germany. Wilhelmshaven was one of the most difficult targets that they had yet struck, and the last time that they attacked this target, the rookies in Liberty Belle had been blown out of the sky. This would be no easy mission. Fortunately, we have this mission shown in detail thanks to the film put together by William Wyler.
The job is to bomb Wilhelmshaven effectively and economically. The enemy is strong, skillful, determined to stop us. Here are his defenses. Each plane indicates a Staffel or squadron of fighters. Heavy anti-aircraft, highly trained and accurate, all along the coast and defending his vital installations. Radar to warn him of our coming. Here is our plan to divide his defenses and weaken his opposition. At 13:30 hours, shortly after takeoff, 6 groups of planes will be heading toward the enemy coast from 6 directions. The enemy alerts all his aerodromes. But which is our main force? What are our targets? Where should the Nazi controllers send their fighters? It's our job to make them guess, and guess wrong. At 14:30 hours, the Blue Force will threaten this entire coastal area of northwestern Germany. Which target will it be? Flensburg? The Kiel Canal? Or will it turn suddenly and bomb Hamburg, Wegersack, or Emden? Actually, it carries no bombs at all. It's a decoy and keeps the fighters from the northern area busy while the White Force, the main effort, heads for the submarine pens of Wilhelmshaven. This is the plan of battle for today, drawn up by the Combined Operations Planning Committee and approved by the Commanding General.
Now, in this film, the Wilhelmshaven raid is actually shown as the 25th and final mission for the Memphis Belle. But in reality, this was not the case. This would be the 24th mission for most of her crew. More than 100 enemy aircraft of all types were seen in the skies over Germany, but the Belle's gunners did their job, claiming 1 fighter damaged in the defense of their fortress. The air-to-air footage in this engagement was also illustrated very well by Wyler.
Committed to our bombing run, we can't dodge flak or fighters. Here's the first. Top turret fires at it. Evans must ignore the battle. Crosshairs lined up on target. Adjustments for wind drift made. 2 more fighters diving from 9 o'clock. Flak now has the range too. They've hit this fort, but he keeps on his bombing run. As lead bombardier, Evans's aim must be good. Every other ship in the group will drop its bombs when he drops his. Now 1 pointer on the bomb site moves toward another stationary pointer. The instant they touch, bombs will release. They touch. Bombs away.
Fortunately, the Memphis Belle and the 91st were once again lucky, and the Germans did not score any hits on the aircraft of their group. No losses were taken and the mission was completed. 24 down, 1 more to go. 2 days later, on May 17th of 1943, the final briefing would be called for the crew members of the Memphis Belle. The target was revealed, the submarine pins of Lorient, France. The crew of the Belle, for one more time, packed their things and crawled into the B-17 that had carried them safely across Europe so many times. In one last moment of nervousness, Captain Robert Morgan reportedly asked William Wyler what was he going to do if the crew of the Belle did not come back. In an honest answer, Wyler told him the truth. He had another crew that they had been filming in one of the other B-17s of the 303rd Bomb Group as a backup. This crew had actually just completed their 25th missions a few days prior, a bomber by the name of Hell's Angels. Robert Morgan likely smiled and laughed, and then headed to his bomber. The docks at Lorient were not quite as treacherous as Bremen or Wilhelmshaven, but they were no milk run. In fact, that had been where Wyler's cinematographer and close friend had been lost in April, and it had also been where the Belle had taken substantial damage in January, putting her out of commission for 2 weeks. But that was the assigned target, one more mission. So the Belle taxied down the runway and got in the air. After forming up and approaching their target in France, the 91st lined up with a clear view, and bombs away was sounded. The B-17s hit their target with multiple aircraft reporting direct hits on the submarine platforms below. Close to the target, German fighters arrived. They dove in for attacks on the American bombers, trying to strike head-on in their normal method of attack. But the gunners of the Belle and the other forts were locked in on this mission. Left waist gunner on the Belle, Clarence Winchell, scores the final confirmed kill for the Memphis Belle, helping to repel the German fighters. Soon enough, after repelling the attackers, the bombers are back over the channel, and the fighters are headed home. The 91st Bomb Group receives no losses over Lorient, and are now closing in on England. Just like that, the Belle is home free. After arriving back at Bassingbourn, the Memphis Belle comes in low and buzzes the tower, something that William Wyler's film made sure to cover.
The Belle comes in for her landing, but first Morgan buzzes the field, cuts the grass with the giant fortress. It's against the rules, but this is a special occasion.
After touching down with the wheels, the crew leapt out of the bomber. They were officially going home. With the 25th and final bomb painted onto the nose of the Belle, her tour was over. She also had 8 swastikas now painted on her side for the claims made by her gunners. Shortly thereafter, she was sent home for a war bond tour, with most of her crew joining and becoming national heroes. Captain Robert Morgan, the pilot, led this tour and actually went on to fly a B-29 named Dauntless Dottie in the Pacific, being the lead pilot for the first B-29 raid over Tokyo in 1944. Co-pilot James Verinis and the Belle's mascot, Stuka, came back to the United States for a little R&R. But he eventually returned to the European theater, flying his own B-17 named Connecticut Yankee. Navigator Chuck Layton, the man who detected the false German radio beacons and saved the Belle from a trap, worked as a school teacher for many years after the war. Bombardier Vince Evans became good friends with Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Stewart, and went on to become a race car driver. That is, after he followed Captain Morgan into the Pacific and finished another tour on his B-29. The first engineer of the Belle, Levi Dillon, who hid his leg injury, flew only 4 missions on the Belle and was then transferred to the 306 Bomb Group. The second engineer of the Belle, Eugene Adkins, flew only 6 missions on the Belle, but then experienced severe frostbite and had to be removed from the crew. He too survived the war. The final engineer and top turret gunner on the Memphis Belle, Harold Locke, flew the remainder of the Belle's missions and settled down and started his own construction company. Radio operator Robert Hansen served the entire tour with the Belle and kept a detailed logbook of all of her missions. During one flight, it was hit with a bullet and likely saved his life. Ball turret gunner Cecil Scott survived the war and went on to work with the Ford Motor Company for 30 years. Right waist gunner Scott Miller, who flew 15 missions with the Belle, went on to become the lost crewman as he dropped out of sight after the war. He tragically missed out on going on the war bond tour, as he missed a few missions earlier in the tour and did not have his full 25 complete when the Belle finished hers. Instead, replacement right waist gunner Casimir Tony Nostel, who flew only 1 mission in the Belle, was sent on the war bond tour in his place. His sole mission on the Memphis Belle was her final one, but he had 25 missions completed, and so he was instead selected for the tour. Here, he can be seen posing in the waist gun position, still named after Miller, the forgotten crewman from West Virginia. Tail gunner John Quinlan was likely one of the best gunners in the 8th Air Force. In his tour with the Belle, he was credited with 1 kill and 1 probable. After the war bond tour, he tried to get assigned to Morgan's crew in the Pacific, but was instead sent to the Chinese theater, where he downed 3 more aircraft from the tail of his B-29. The unsung hero of the Belle, crew chief Joe Giambroni, kept the Belle flying for 6 months in combat. In that time period, he replaced 9 engines, both wings, 2 tails, and both of her main landing gear. William Wyler went on to release his film in 1944, titled The Memphis Belle, The Story of a Flying Fortress. It was a hit across the country and solidified the B-17's place in history. And last but not least, Miss Margaret Polk, the namesake of the Belle, did not end up staying with Robert Morgan. But she did go on to become one of the greatest fundraisers for the Memphis Belle, supporting the aircraft's restoration and upkeep until her death. As for the Belle herself, she was eventually retired after the war bond tour and essentially assigned to be scrapped. After all, with the war progressing, there were many other more important things to worry about. But following the end of the conflict, the city of Memphis became aware that the Belle was in an aircraft graveyard in Oklahoma. They then purchased the Belle for $350 and flew her back to Memphis, Tennessee, where she was kept for 60 years. Eventually, she was moved to the National Museum of the United States Air Force, where she has been fully restored and is on display to the public for her story and that of the brave men who flew her to be told to all who come and visit. If you enjoyed this documentary, please consider supporting my work at the links below so that I can continue to tell these stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.